Come on in. Nice and tight. Good morning, everyone. How are we doing on time? About 3 minutes late. I apologize. Well, good morning, everyone. San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria, welcome to our monthly media briefing for the month of March. As you all know, I like to do these every month to provide an update on some of the important issues we're working on here for the people of San Diego, as well as to look ahead at some of the items that are coming up in the month ahead, and then, of course, offer the members of the media an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. I'm pleased to be joined this morning by San Diego Police Chief David Nisleit, as well as Adrian Granda, who's the Director of our Department of Government Affairs. Today, I'd like to highlight our efforts to get state funding and legislative support for some of the issues that tend to play out on the local level but require significant partnership from the county and state governments. Yesterday, or let me say, you probably noticed I've been going to Sacramento a fair amount. I was up there yesterday, and I spent the day working on, then and the week before, on a couple of key issues. First, funding to tackle homelessness. Second, legislation to reform our behavioral health laws in the state of California. And lastly, legislation that would help our efforts to rein in the growing problem of deadly illicit fentanyl overdoses, specifically holding predatory dealers accountable. Last week, I testified before the State Assembly's Budget Subcommittee on behalf of not just the city of San Diego, but on behalf of the 12 other cities in our Big City Mayors Coalition, which collectively represents the 13 largest cities in the state of California and the 11 million Californians who live in them. I was there to remind our state legislators that even though the state is experiencing a tighter budget this year, now is not the time to pull back on what everyone up and down the state and in the halls of the Capitol tell us is the top priority, which is homelessness. State funding to address this critical issue has been an enormously positive impact in San Diego and across the state. Now, many people assume, because homelessness continues to be a significant problem, that many of the programs we're using are not working. And that's simply not true. The fact is that we've been able to transition thousands of people off the streets and into permanent housing through our programs. We have to and will do much more, but we can't say it's not worth investing in this problem simply because it's been growing for decades, because we haven't solved it, particularly during the most challenging years in recent history that any of us have experienced. I told the panel that if this is in fact the biggest challenge facing our state, and all of our cities and all of our counties agree that it is, then the state budget should demonstrate a commitment to meeting the enormity of this challenge. Over the past few years, San Diego and our fellow cities have created more housing, opened more shelters, addressed more encampments, deployed more outreach workers, have turned parking lots into safe parking zones, and we've so many other programs that are making a difference. So I urge state legislators to increase funding to keep this battle going, to keep the funds sufficiently flexible to allow communities like ours to tailor these programs to the unique circumstances we find in our cities, and to make that funding permanent, to make it long-term so that we can go out and actually make better deals on behalf of the public, to strike better financial terms for things like hotel acquisitions that we have used to increase shelter capacity. This is one of the ways I think we can stretch limited state dollars further and have a greater impact. You'll continue to see me advocating on the state budget throughout the rest of the budget cycle, which will play out over the next number of months. Now, yesterday, again wearing my Big City Mayor's chair hat, I joined a few fellow mayors as well as many state legislators to support two recently introduced bills authored by State Senator Susan Talamantes-Eggman that will reform California's conservatorship laws to make them more effective. All 13 cities in our Big City Mayors Coalition support these two bills. Republicans, Democrats, cities in the South and the North, on the coast and inland, all believe these bills are worthy of the state legislature's approval and the governor's signature. Let me tell you a little bit more about these bills. Senate Bill 43 seeks to reform California's conservatorship law by updating the criteria for gravely disabled, which is the standard for conservatorship eligibility. Now, what I'd like to note that what we're talking about is known as LPS conservatorships, which seek to protect people who are disabled by mental illness. This is different than probate conservatorships. This bill seeks to go beyond the current conservatorship rules, which focus on a person's ability to acquire food, clothing, shelter, and which it ultimately fails to address the real needs of desperately ill people and often leads to their criminalization and jail instead of treatment. I hear stories from San Diegans all the time. One that I've heard recently is a woman who was trying to get her gravely mentally ill son placed into conservatorship, and the fact that he eats out of trash cans was counted as a means of being able to provide for his daily nourishment. That's appalling, and it is no way matches what any of us should expect when it comes to living in San Diego or in California or in the United States. This is not acceptable. SB 43 would slightly broaden the definition of gravely disabled to include the potential for serious physical harm and mental harm stemming from a person's inability to provide for their own nourishment, personal or medical care, and appropriate shelter. It also includes an incapacity to attend for their self-protection or personal safety due to a mental health or substance use disorder. The other bill that we are supporting is Senate Bill 363, which would establish a real-time online dashboard to collect and aggregate information on the availability of beds in psychiatric and substance abuse facilities. Access to up-to-date database of available beds would help clinicians quickly find and secure treatment options for folks in need of care and could reduce delays in getting that care, as well as repeated and extended stays in emergency rooms. This really would benefit every Californian. These are two reforms that will make all the sense in the world and will address some of the truly heartbreaking situations that so many sick people and their families are facing. And I would like to share that more people are dealing with this than you often might think, certainly more than I had often thought. Just this past weekend, I met a resident of La Jolla whose adult son suffers from schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. This young man has been in and out of psychiatric facilities. Along the way, he got hooked on opioids, and he's had a number of episodes that have resulted in jail time. He has been referred for a conservatorship, but deemed ineligible, despite being genuinely incapable of taking care of himself. His parents have many advantages, many opportunities to be and care deeply about their son, but they're unable to get what they believe that he needs. And they are sick with worry about their severely ill child not being able to get the care that he desperately needs and fear what will ultimately happen to him because of this lack of ability to access care. Their experience is shared by so many throughout the state of California, and it is past time that we do something about it. I would note that last year we came very close to passing similar legislation, and we did get Care Court passed, and I'm grateful for Senator Eggman continuing to push on this important issue. We will get this done. Finally, we're continuing our push for action to address illicit fentanyl and the impacts it's having on our community, including severe addiction and overdose deaths. In November, I signed an executive order directing greater law enforcement focus, and that direction has been taken seriously by our police chief and the department, who are working with our state and federal partners to step up enforcement. And Chief, I appreciate your partnership and your leadership on this important issue. We now have fentanyl detecting dogs who are working to catch distributors, and our police department, along with our regional partners, have had some significant busts in recent months that many of you have covered. I also promised to advocate for solid legislation that would hold predatory dealers to account, and I've been advocating in Sacramento for two bills that will do precisely that. One of those bills is Senate Bill 44, also known as Alexandra's Law, which is named after a young girl who was killed by a fentanyl-laced pill. It's being carried by Senator Tom Unberg from Santa Ana, who is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and one of the authors of the landmark Care Court legislation that was passed last year. Senate Bill 44 requires convicted fentanyl dealers to sign a statement as a part of any plea acknowledging that they will face steeper consequences if they're convicted again and an overdose death occurs. It would then increase penalties in those repeated cases. The other bill is Assembly Bill 367, authored by San Diego's own Assemblymember Brian Mainshine, which provides for stiffer penalties for criminals who sell or provide fentanyl or other illicit drugs that result in a serious injury or death. Folks, we have to get serious about this drug and start handling down consequences on dealers who know that they are dealing with a deadly substance and show a callous disregard for people's lives by selling laced drugs or other lethal doses. I'd remind you that fentanyl overdoses killed more than 800 San Diegans in 2021, and that number is only going to rise if we don't do everything we can to address this issue. We have to raise the stakes on dealing this drug, and if you choose to sell drugs and you kill someone, the law ought to treat you like the killer that you are. Now, I want to give you a quick preview of what's to come in March, and then I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. There's some coverage today that I think is worthy of note about the return of smart streetlights to San Diego. Our city's Privacy Advisory Board will be reviewing this technology and make a recommendation to the City Council for their consideration. My hope is that that will be considered and approved by the City Council in the month of March, and then the months afterward we can redeploy that technology in a way that respects civil liberties and privacy, but gives a new important tool to our police department, or restores an important tool to our police department to do the work that they need to do to keep us all safe. I would also point out in the month of March, we anticipate the opening of the safe parking lot in Rose Canyon. Many of you know this is on a piece of city-owned property on Morena, just on the edge of PB and Claremont. This is a new facility that will add to our already existing inventory of safe parking lots for people experiencing homelessness, but who have cars. That project, again, will open in the month of March. I look forward to seeing you all out there when we're able to open that. And lastly, many of you know that among the challenges we have here at the city in terms of the speed and pace with which we want to provide services to the public, often that is slower than I would like, than San Diegans would like, because we have many vacancies at the city. And so we are hosting a career fair, encouraging folks who want to be a part of the solution, want to help their city out, and want to have a good job with good pay and benefits to come to a career fair. It'll be held on March 22nd from 10 to 2 in the Balboa Park Club. Again, if you're interested in a great career at a great employer, encourage folks to be a part of the solution. I'd like to see those street lights get fixed faster too. I'd like to fill those potholes faster too. I need some more hands to do that. Maybe you all can consider whether or not the city would be a good place for you. With that, I'm happy to answer questions that folks may have.
Does there finally seem to be a consensus on this mental health situation? And obviously there have been pushback from the experts who said this is going to be used with how are we going to judge? You're aware of that, so I don't want to get too far into it. But finally, there's a consensus that we can do this properly and not commit somebody needlessly in terms of his family or whatever situation. That we just can't not ignore this any longer.
Mm-hmm. I definitely sense a general agreement that our current situation is untenable. The solutions, I think there is a growing support for the idea of reforming a law that's over 50 years old. The LPS law that created our current conservatorship structure was passed in the late 1960s. I don't think anything passed that long ago doesn't need updating. It needs to be updated, and what we're specifically recommending, I think, would be much more appropriate to the situation we find ourselves in California in 2023. This is a bipartisan piece of legislation. We have Republicans and Democrats supporting the bill. As I mentioned, all 13 big city mayors in California, again, Republicans and Democrats all supporting that. And so, Ed, I think what we have is an extremely high likelihood that this will pass this year. I will remind you that last year it passed handily out of the state Senate and only failed in the Assembly because the bill wasn't set for hearing, meaning to say that the chairman of that committee didn't wish to provide it a committee hearing, which was necessary. That doesn't show lack of support. That shows one individual's lack of support. And I would note that that gentleman is no longer in the legislature. And in that role, he's actually been replaced by San Diego's Assembly member Brian Mainshine, who I believe will be very effective in getting this passed. With regard to the concerns of family members, of some advocates that are fearful about civil liberties, I'll remind you this is an extensive process with a lot of due process. The emergency psychiatric holds are multi-phased. They are renewed repeatedly. There is a legal process. There's court hearings. It's still very lengthy. What we're simply saying is the number of people who could be considered for that would be larger than it currently is. So that basically, like the gentleman I referred to, the court couldn't say, well, he can provide for his own well-being because he eats out of trash cans. No, that's not acceptable. There's a story of a gentleman named Mark Rippey in Sacramento who was denied a conservatorship despite suffering from a severe brain injury, as well as other mental health issues, other addiction issues. He was also blind. His family, his sisters, were continually trying to get him into a conservatorship. He was repeatedly denied. He died only a few months ago on the streets of Sacramento. That is disgusting. That is not acceptable. That ought to change. And that is what we have consensus on. And I believe the bill might change over the process, but ultimately whatever would get passed will certainly be better than our current circumstances where we simply leave people out on the sidewalks.
Without getting too far into the nuts and bolts
Mm-hmm.
of the guy screaming on the street and how are we going to evaluate that, what would be the layer, the extra layer, and are we equipped now to do something like that? Or we got another layer of bureaucracy here, and I mean that in a positive manner.
Yeah, I know where you work, but I don't. Here's the thing, is that the threshold now is so high that not a lot of people can attain it, right? What we're moving is down slightly to say the people that your viewers, my constituents, see every single day and say that person is clearly mentally ill, why aren't you doing something about it? Well, chief's officers are often get those phone calls. Their hands are tied. My hands are tied. County will say, well, they don't meet the threshold. State wouldn't adjudicate it. Even if they get a hearing, it gets rejected, like the stories I gave you this morning. And what we're left with is a person that goes right back to the sidewalk, cycles in and out of the emergency rooms, out of our jail system. That's ridiculous. It's really expensive, too, and it's very ineffective. And the end result is often death. So we know this is what's happening. This is not about additional bureaucracy. This is about actually being effective and taking care of the problem that all of us see, all of us acknowledge, all of us are frustrated by. 50 years of doing it the wrong way can't continue. We have to try something different. I believe that this will be effective in helping us address the very small part of this population that is severely mentally ill and who deserves something better than the sidewalk. And I remind you that some of these folks are well situated. The gentleman, that family I was talking about before, I mean, they are able to provide for their child, but he's so mentally ill, he doesn't know he's sick. He doesn't know that he needs this intervention. And right now, again, our answer is, well, he's an adult and he can make his own choices. He's not making choices. The concept is that they die on the streets with their rights on. No, we need to change that. This will change that. Lisa and then Andrew.
So whether we're talking about care court,
Mm-hmm.
fentanyl, conservatorship reform, the thing I'm constantly hearing about is people struggling to access services or beds. So even if they themselves desperately want it, like recently I've been hearing from folks trying to get detox beds, for example, especially in central San Diego, it's extremely hard. So what are you doing to try to address the lack of treatment available? And are you potentially looking at using opioid settlement funds to try to work on that?
So a couple things. I mean, I acknowledge that there are difficulties accessing care, right? That we have an oversubscribed system that needs to be expanded. That's a part of why I'm asking the state legislature to increase funding. To your point, I mean, their point is they have put billions behind this, and their answer, yeah, it's right. But we need even more because folks often can't get the care that they need today. To connect these two issues, I personally think that the more that we make this a responsibility, we make it clear that in the case of care court, counties have a responsibility to deal with the severely mentally ill, then they're going to have to meet that obligation with a budget that matches it. So I think that in some ways this starts with making sure that the responsibility is clear and then allow folks to actually appropriate for it, right? I make the analogy of, we have laws that require public education. And as a result, we build schools, hire teachers, and procure textbooks. That kind of compulsory responsibility allows us to do this work. What we have to say is quit ignoring mental health and provide the resources to actually address it. We at the city, as you know, has worked hard to try and expand our offerings. I mentioned the safe parking lots, additional shelter beds, things of that nature. Naturally, detox beds and this more of the mental health component often falls more on the county and on the state. We have partnered with them. Some of our recent shelter expansions, as you know, the Sea Heart Shelter on Sports Arena Boulevard, the Sprung Tent on Rosecrans, the Safe Haven beds on Pacific Highway. All those are partnerships with the county, so we're providing some of our dollars, they're providing some of theirs, and so we're providing a more rich behavioral health environment in those shelters, different than in times past. So we're trying to do what we can locally, but I acknowledge more must be done. And to the extent that folks have good pieces of legislation or there's legislators that need a phone call, this mayor will always make the effort to do that, because I want to make sure not only as we create these responsibilities, mandates, and expanding the scope of some of these programs, we have to have the resources to do them. And much of that in my world is around land use. You've seen we have been very aggressive in trying to expand housing opportunities in the city of San Diego. We will continue to do our part, but we need everybody rowing in the same direction. Andrew.
There was some news yesterday from the U.S. Department of Transportation. They announced the grants for the Reconnecting Communities pilot program. This is money in the federal infrastructure law for communities that were divided by freeways, either remove a freeway, put a lid over it. Sandag had applied for a planning grant for the lid over I-5 in Barrio Logan, and it didn't receive funding in this first round. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that project, the importance of it, and what the path forward is, given that there are so few resources for those kinds of projects.
I really love you asked that question. I had the privilege of being a congressional staffer when we were able to dedicate the I-15 completion through City Heights, and that had some lids attached, not nearly what we first envisioned. Budgets are always challenging. But the end result is a community that is less disconnected because you have Terralta Park, because you have some of those widened platforms that are there, and it creates the opportunity for transit connections, as we finally were able to do with the Centerline project. And so that need to knit neighborhoods back together again, I think is significant. I think it's important. And so when it was included in the bipartisan infrastructure law, I was quite happy. I mean, it's a real recognition on the federal government's part that there's unfinished business here, that we need to go back and correct some of this stuff. And so I think one of our challenges in San Diego is it's not just I-5, the 94. There are dreams about trying to reconnect Sherman Heights to Golden Hills. So there are a multitude of needs, not enough resources, and as you mentioned, at least our first effort in this direction for this pot of money has been unsuccessful. But we're committed to continue to work with both MTS, SANDAG, and other regional partners to try and bring down these dollars. I just think it's a wonderful opportunity, not only just to do the social connections that are possible, but the opportunity to have more public realm spaces, the parks that could be along the S-curve through downtown, to connect Barrio Logan Heights together with the rest of the community. It's just a real opportunity, and I thank the administration for acknowledging that issue. But I will acknowledge the amount of need as I was looking at applications from across the country. I mean, there's just a ton of need, right? And we're going to have to work closely with our members of Congress to try and do our very best to get these dollars to come here. We currently have a number of other applications pending before the federal government to do things like slow streets initiatives, to try and do some Vision Zero stuff on El Cajon Boulevard. There's a lot of stuff pending, and my hope is that those visits to D.C., which are a little harder to do, Sacramento easier, more frequent flights, quicker trip. But we continue to go back there and knocking on the U.S. Department of Transportation and other doors to try and get those dollars to come back to San Diego. As you know, my focus is always trying to make sure we get our fair share, or on a good day, more than our fair share of federal or state resources for San Diego.
Follow-up. So there's an idea that circulates on Twitter every so often to decommission the 163 freeway through Balboa Park. Maybe build a transit line that would connect to the central mobility hub that is supposed to be built where we're standing. What are your thoughts on that idea, if not under you as mayor, maybe someday in the future? Well,
I've seen that same visual, and it's gorgeous. I've also seen the original, the pond that was underneath the Cabrillo Bridge. I mean, I get the notion. I think that one's probably a far harder to accomplish. That corridor is deemed historic, and so I recognize that there probably any alteration in that space from the current status quo is going to be difficult. Obviously, there's connectivity issues, and the neighborhoods around Balboa Park is an area of a lot of focus for the city as we try to meet our housing goals, and so the ability to provide mobility options. I think the likelier scenario, and one of the things we're trying to do currently with the bus lane up Park Boulevard and a lot of the bicycle infrastructure, is just to provide more choices in that realm. And I recognize that's a pretty cool spot there. I think maybe one of the best places to start is make sure those walking trails are enhanced, are safe, are usable at all hours of the day. I think that's probably a good near-term objective as we consider what the future of San Diego looks like from a vehicle perspective. Who else? Anyone else? I'm going to give Shannon a good shot.
Just
Yeah.
back to the homeless issue.
Yeah.
You mentioned the homeless programs are working. You're getting people off the streets.
Yeah.
Which I know you are. But can you talk about the fact that for every person you get off the street, how many more become homeless?
Yeah.
Because I think the public is saying
100%.
he's saying these programs are working, yet we're seeing more homeless people.
Totally.
So if you could address that.
Yeah, totally can. I appreciate the question. And because these both can be true, right? So for every 10 people we get off the streets in San Diego, 13 become homeless. And that is a part of why you can see more programs, more shelter beds, more effort, more spending, and not necessarily seeing the reduction that you want. Now, the question is, why is this happening? Well, fundamentally, it's because the housing in this city is too expensive, right? $3,000 a month, one-bedroom apartments mean that average San Diegans struggle. People with very few privileges, mental illness, poverty, and other issues, they're going to end up on the street. And so we have to work on the housing issue. But the connection I'm making this morning is it's not just housing, although that's the preponderance of it. There are also this group of folks who are severely mentally ill for whom we struggle to get them off the streets. Those are typically who your viewers are most frustrated by. They see this horrible situation playing out, and they're asking, why is nobody doing anything about it? As I've already explained, in part because the laws prevent us from being able to do that. And that's why we need Senate Bill 43 to at least give us a chance to get before a court and explain to somebody why this is not going to work, right? This person is going to deteriorate and die on the street if we don't do something. Fentanyl is also a game changer on this issue. It's a relatively new substance in our community, just the last number of years. And what we've seen is that, it was formulated as an anesthetic, right? Something for surgery, put you out. Well, we have outreach workers making contact with people who are not present, right? And so when you're trying to do this difficult work of contact and build rapport and get them into shelter, but if they're so deep in their addiction that they're not reachable, at least not in that moment, you understand how we have difficulty getting people off the streets. So fundamentally, it's a housing issue, but is not helped by the mental health crisis and the addiction crisis that we're dealing with. And we're going to continue on this path if we don't make some changes. I do want to reemphasize, we get thousands of people off the streets every year, thousands. But obviously thousands more are joining them. And we have to build more housing. We have to have a better behavioral health system. We have to hold predatory drug dealers accountable. I think those three things, coupled with obviously a couple other things, will go a long way to getting the impacts that we want to see here in California and across the country.
And unrelated,
Mm-hmm.
follow, but not really.
Mhm.
Potholes, I know we've done
Mhm.
a follow-up story of you guys filling all these potholes
Yeah.
and how well you're doing, but for someone who says, well, they haven't filled the one in my neighborhood yet, talk about kind of the lineage of that and if you'll get to it.
Yeah, well, we continue to have all hands on deck. We're making folks work at night, on the weekends to fill these potholes. I hear those same complaints, and we need folks to report what's in their community. The Get It Done app is the most effective way. Sometimes folks call my office, and we're happy to take that request and file it for you. But you can literally download something onto your phone, and that will go straight to the person that fills potholes. Cut out the middleman. Just get it done, right? So I would I'd ask all of you to help and encourage and put out to the public, listen, this goes from your phone to the guy's desk who does this work. So get it done. Let us know what's out there. But we will continue in this aggressive posture as we deal with the storms. Obviously, storms create potholes. But we won't take our eye off the long-term need to invest in our roads. In March, or if this rain continues, rain definitely messes with our ability to do overlay paving projects, right? We got to stop when it rains. But you're going to see repaving of Convoy, of La Jolla Parkway, of Dave, help me out, La Media downtown down in San Ysidro. Was that one of them? Yeah. Division, Meadowbrook. So, I mean, we're in prime paving season. That makes the mayor very happy. You can't do this when the temperatures are too cold. You can't do it when it's raining. The conditions out there are going to get a bit better, but we definitely need the public's help on potholes. I worry a lot about our pothole situation, not just because it's an inconvenience and it's sort of, obviously it's jarring when you're driving down the road, but I worry about a lot what that means for cyclists and for pedestrians. It's can often be an inconvenience and sometimes destructive to a vehicle, but it can be deadly for pedestrians and cyclists. So we really need San Diegans to be a part of the solution, help us solve this problem. We have hardworking crews that go out all the time to fill these potholes, but we can only fix the ones that we know about. We've directed crews to go out and fill the ones we get complaints and then look around in the general vicinity and fill those too. But some areas just are not as vocal. I worry about that. Trust me, as the mayor-mobile is going around town, I'm flagging complaints myself because I want to make sure that we're getting these in the system and let our folks do what they do well, which is fill potholes. Lisa.
This may be a question for the chief.
Okay.
I'm curious what the increased fentanyl enforcement is looking like in practice, and there was some discussion, I think, in a recent UT story about hotspots. Can you talk a little bit about what that's looking like?
Yeah.
No, I appreciate the question, Lisa. So what the enforcement has looked like for us is, we were doing this work. We've added some new tools, if you will. We'll talk soon about the 3 new dogs that we have that are fentanyl trained. So these were already narcotic detection dogs that have now also had fentanyl onto them, so now they can recognize fentanyl. It's working with our counterparts from the Narcotics Task Force, working with our counterparts down at the border. It's an all hands-on approach. It's work in the streets. It's going out there and doing undercover buys. It's all of that. And then working these cases backwards when we have an overdose death, working very closely with Narcotics Task Force Team 10, which is I have a supervisor and a detective on, and then forwarding those cases either to the district attorney or the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution. And so that's really been the approach. It's something that we're very involved in. I was just reading an article this morning, over 100,000 overdose deaths in the United States in 2021. I have not seen the numbers yet for 22. I'm going to guess it's probably has risen even more, but that means an American is dying every 5 to 7 minutes from an overdose death. So obviously this is something a major priority for us. It's a major priority for all of our counterparts throughout this county, whether local, state, or federal.
So one thing that I hear a lot about from residents is people openly using drugs, and then from folks that are more on the advocacy side,
Yes.
harm reduction side, they're concerned about, you know, the city or the state with this new legislation cracking down on people who are kind of maybe part of the game, but they're not the big kingpin or whatever. What would you, and certainly Mayor Gloria, if you want to weigh in too, I mean, what is kind of the current state of affairs on these things in terms of enforcement? And how do you make sure that you're not getting somebody that's kind of also being preyed upon and their user that's maybe selling a few?
Yeah.
I appreciate that tension. That's some of the conversations with legislators. You know, Sacramento has, you know, passed some significant criminal justice reforms, and this request to, you know, increase penalties on fentanyl is sort of swimming upstream compared to recent efforts. What I try and educate my former colleagues to understand, this is not like stuff in the past. You know, when they say one pill can kill, that is accurate. This is a poison that is killing people. And so when you talk about the levels of involvement, I mean, let's just acknowledge all of that's criminal, right? All of that's breaking the law. And I would expect our police department to enforce the law for anyone who is choosing to break it. Now, I think we recognize there are different levels of degrees of participation in this illegal trade. And so the legislation I mentioned today, SB 44, AB 367, is focused on the dealers, right? And there's a healthy conversation that I was having as recently as yesterday with legislators. Well, you know, we want the kingpins, we want the cartels, we want the big fish. You know, we don't want to focus too much on the small-time folks and party drugs and things of that nature. Again, I would acknowledge all of that's criminal. So I hope that what we're saying is there should be consequences, but for everybody involved in that, but that the consequences for those who are truly trafficking and helping to sustain this illicit enterprise are held most accountable. So I think you ask a great question, because that's where I think a lot of these bills are going to play out over the legislative term. But ultimately, we cannot continue on the path that we're on, and it is incorrect to compare this drug that is so fatal with things that we've seen in the past. This is unique. This is different. This is why I'm sounding the alarm bell. This is why I've stood at this podium on multiple occasions now explaining that I need you all to help educate your viewers, listeners, and readers about how bad this is, because it is killing people. And it's not just homeless people, right? You know better than most. The 800 I mentioned before, over 100 of those folks were unsheltered. But that means that nearly 700 were people like all of us. And we're not talking about this nearly enough. And importantly, I don't think we're doing enough to hold people accountable, particularly at the state level. The partnership that the chief was talking about in answering your previous question, I've been very impressed by the local, state, and federal approach, at least in San Diego, on this. We've always had a collaborative spirit here that I think yields better results. But when you get knee-deep in what the federal government is doing, the state government, I was just meeting with CBP the other day and understanding their detection efforts down at the border, to a visit to the medical examiner's office and understanding how they share information from the county to the city. Everyone understands internally this is a big problem. I need everyone externally to understand that. And when that happens, I believe we will get these bills passed in the legislature. Yeah. And Chief, did you have any follow-up on that?
Mayor, can I actually add something there?
Yeah.
Sorry, Adrian Granda, Director of Government Affairs, who leads the state regulatory efforts for the city. I want to highlight that the mayor is leading on these two bills specifically around fentanyl because they deal with overdose deaths. So we're dealing with people and loss of life. So mayor's going to be meeting later today with a father of a young woman, Alexandra, who he mentioned. Alexandra's Law is SB 44. She died at the age of 20 from a laced Percocet pill. That's what we're talking about here. So these two bills aren't just going after low-level dealers. They're going after folks whose actions are actually leading to the consequence of death. So I just want to make that very clear.
Not to give you whiplash on this back to transportation.
Yeah.
So the city's,
I know who I'm talking to.
Balboa Drive. And,
Yeah.
Your sustainability mobility department is planning, or the design they have put forward is reducing it to one lane, increasing the parking supply, and it would have sharrows, so no dedicated bike lane. There's some activists who are planning to go to the Balboa Park committee this evening asking for a two-way protected bike lane, which is what's called for in the Balboa Park master plan. I'm wondering if the decision is made on that. Is that a done deal? And if so, why not follow the park master plan and put a protected bike lane there?
Well, we're putting a protected bike lane there. I mean, there's
On Balboa Drive.
Oh, I'm sorry, Balboa. So sorry.
That's all right.
Did I miss that? You probably said that.
This is the West Main
Yes,
side, so
correct. Yeah. So what we're trying to accomplish there is to increase parking. Right, we're removing a substantial amount of parking from Park Boulevard, but we want to, and have heard the concerns of institutions and park users that they still, many of them will choose to drive there. So. That additional parking there, I think, will be helpful. It's a place where there already is parking. We're just going to yield more of it. I think the angled approach will help slow traffic down there. I think some of that Balboa Drive is way too wide for the interior road in a park. And when you look at the bike lanes that we have on 4th and 5th and 6th, and now on Balboa, and then on Park Boulevard. I mean, we're creating a rich environment. Pershing, I would add, that's under construction now. The recent ones on Upus. I mean, there's a lot going into the vicinity, and I think what we're trying to do, acknowledging that Balboa Drive is an interior road with less traffic, and when we can position the parking in a way that I think will slow vehicles down, I think it becomes a reasonable treatment for that space, recognizing that there's a rich environment there. But we have to do more. And I understand, and I always hear the concern of cyclists. They want more, they're demanding more. I realize that that's coming from a place of concern around safety. And we're going to continue to move in this general direction. I also hear the complaints of folks, and I understand that change can be hard. But I remind people is that you should be able to safely get to your destination, no matter how you choose to get there. If you choose to walk, you choose to bike, drive your car, take transit. Right now, we know that for many cyclists, it is not safe. And so what we're doing on Park Boulevard, what we're doing on Balboa Drive, I think will certainly make it safer, will make it more attractive for people to choose that approach. And I think what we're doing on Balboa Drive is an important balance. We've tried to balance well on Park Boulevard by providing a better amenity for both drivers, transit users, and cyclists. That's essentially what we're trying to accomplish on Balboa Drive. We will see what happens with the committee and whatnot, but we have some need to get all that done relatively quickly. The park has a summer moratorium for these projects, and we need to get this stuff done in sort of what is the low season before things get super busy there. Look forward to seeing a lot of you out there for the Pride Parade when it ends on a freshly paved street that does not have potholes. That would make this mayor very happy on Pride Week. Yeah, Ed.
Quickly, you need to extend the President's Way stop there. The road has gotten even worse going towards City College. The overlay. I'm being somewhat facetious.
Oh, the Caltrans part. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
We stopped it at President's Way. It needs to be extended. I'm just making comments.
That's
like
that-
everybody else.
That is a function of the state of California because we start to get close to the on-ramp and off-ramp. And so when we do paving work that's anywhere near an on-ramp or off-ramp, it's not just a mayor's decision. It involves other people. Trust me, if it were just me, then we'd be doing things a little bit different. But we do have to work well with our state partners, if not the least of which because I want to get more homeless money out of them. I want to pass this conservatorship law, and I want them to take illicit fentanyl seriously. Thank you guys very much for being here. We'll see you next month.